Hippocrates was the father of medicine. He made the Hippocratic Oath. Galen studied human anatomy. Leonardo da Vinci made many anatomical drawings. Andreas Vesalius did work in the field of anatomy. Ambroise Paré constricted blood vessels to stop bleeding. Antony von Leeuwenhoek hand-grabbed lenses for his microscopes. Robert Hooke studied cork and named cells. Linnaeus developed a system for classifying organisms. Thomas Malthus wrote a book on population. Charles Lyell was a uniformitarian. Matthias Schleiden contributed to cell theory. Charles Darwin developed the theory of descent with modification. Alfred Wallace was a contributor to the theory of evolution. Thomas Hunt Morgan studied fruit flies. Alexander Fleming developed penicillin to fight bacteria. James Watson and Francis Crick discovered the double helix of DNA. Theodore Schwann contributed to cell theory. Rudolf Virchow said where there is a cell there must have been one before. Louis Pasteur developed pasteurization to kill microorganisms. Gregor Mendel did work in genetics with pea plants. John Baptiste Lamarck developed the theory of inheritance. Edward Jenner developed a vaccine for the smallpox virus. Francesco Redi demonstrated that flies were not produced by spontaneous generation. William Harvey named the continuous circulation of the blood. Alright, so we've taken now all of those biologists that we just learned about and placed them on a timeline as clothespins on a clothesline. And the closer you get to the front of the room, the more recent those people lived. So present day is at the front of the room. And then as you go towards the back of the room, you move backwards in time. Now if you'll notice, there are many more biologists and scientists in the more recent time period than we have in the past. And we're going to take a look at why that is and what events in history made this occur. The first event that we're going to look at is the Greek Empire. Now the reign of the Greek Empire was a time of some new ideas in science. The Greeks were very good at coming up with new inventions. And so we have some scientists who made some great discoveries in the time of the Greeks. We have a few. Now while technology was limited, they were very innovative. But the Greeks were conquered by the Roman Empire. And when the Roman Empire took over, they took all of the great ideas that the Greeks had been developing and they made it a part of their own culture. Because the Romans were really sort of borrowers. They didn't have a lot of their own new ideas, but they took all of the things that they liked about the cultures that they conquered and they incorporated it into their own culture. So rather than having anything new developed, they really just worked off of what the Greeks had already started learning. And so we don't have very many new developments in the time of the Romans. Now, after the fall of the Roman Empire, we have the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages is a common term for the medieval period of history. And this is a time of famine and plague and hunger, and people were much more concerned with survival than they were with learning about biology or any other science. Science really went by the wayside because people were afraid of dying, and they had some other concerns that made them not want to spend time learning about science. And then towards the end of the Dark Ages, we have the Renaissance begin to develop in about the 1400s. And the Renaissance was really a time when people began to return to thinking about things the way that the Romans and the Greeks had thought about them. It was a return to the classical thought of philosophy and science. And the people of the Renaissance were very interested in finding out why things happened the way they did and looking for answers. And so they began to test some of the old theories that had never been questioned before. Many inventions came out of the Renaissance as well, and one of those was the printing press, which was invented by Johannes Gutenberg. And this was a big establishment for science because the printing press allowed scientists to share the work that they were doing with other scientists. Up until this point, books had to be handwritten, and so they were very expensive and very rare. But after the printing press, scientists could publish their findings in newspapers or in articles, in periodicals, so that they could share those with other scientists. And as scientists began to learn from each other, they could they could work on things um, that other scientists weren't working on. And so instead of having to repeat the same study over and over again, they could work on new developments. And we had a lot of new ideas and discoveries coming out of this time period after the printing press. Now, later in the 1700s and 1800s, we have the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution was a time of the assembly line. We had a lot of new technologies come out of this time period. Up until this point, microscopes had to be hand-made and the lenses had to be hand-ground, which is a lot of work and it takes a long time. And so, because of the Industrial Revolution, scientists were able to get the equipment that they needed for a lot less money because it was mass-produced, and also a lot quicker, and of a higher quality when it came off of an assembly line. So the Industrial Revolution helped with technology in fields of science. So you can see that because of the Renaissance and the printing press and the Industrial Revolution and other things that were happening in this time period, we have an explosion of scientists who began to practice in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. And so we can see why we have so many more scientists in this era than we had before that time.